The truth will set us all free.
Hello.
We need to talk.
How could you do this to me?
We didn't escalate.
We didn't want to hurt you.
For as long as I can remember, there was only silence where my parents should have been. Not the peaceful kind of silence, but the deafening, hollow kind that fills every empty room and echoes in your heart. They left when I was just a little girl. No goodbyes, no explanations, just gone. And for years, I carried that absence like a shadow, a constant reminder that the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally had chosen to walk away. Growing up without them was like trying to build a life on sand. I learned early on that love could be conditional, that family wasn't always a safe place. Birthdays passed without cards or calls. School plays, graduations, heartbreaks, moments I longed to share with them. But they were never there. I became an expert at pretending I was fine, but inside, I was a storm of loneliness and unanswered questions. Then, out of nowhere, the news came. They were back. After all these years, my parents wanted to see me. My heart twisted in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope and fear tangled together so tightly I could barely breathe. Could this be the reunion I'd dreamed of in my darkest nights? Or was it the start of a new nightmare? A cruel reminder that some wounds never heal? I found myself standing at a crossroads, torn between the desperate wish to believe in second chances and the bitter taste of past betrayals. Every instinct screamed to run, to protect the fragile life I'd built without them. But a small, stubborn part of me, maybe the little girl who still wanted her parents, whispered that maybe, just maybe, this time could be different. So, despite the knot of anxiety tightening in my chest, I made the decision I would meet them. I had to know the truth. And whatever happened next, I was ready to face it, because sometimes the hardest step toward healing is simply showing up. The day they arrived, my heart was a battleground of emotions. When I saw them standing on my doorstep, older, wearier, but unmistakably my parents, something inside me softened, even as every warning bell screamed to stay guarded. Their eyes held a mixture of regret and hope, and their voices trembled as they spoke, as if they were afraid I might shut the door before they could say a word. They apologized over and over, words I had longed to hear but never expected. "We're sorry for everything," they said, their voices thick with emotion. "We want to make things right." For a moment, I almost believed them. I wanted to believe them. The warmth of that hope wrapped around me like a fragile blanket, tempting me to let down my walls. But beneath that warmth, a cold suspicion gnawed at me. How could I forget the years of silence, the nights I cried myself to sleep wondering why they left? The memories came rushing back. My 10th birthday party with no one there but my aunt, the school plays I performed in alone, the holidays spent pretending I didn't care. I remembered the empty chair at the dinner table, the unanswered phone calls, the broken promises. Those wounds were still raw, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to reopen them. As they settled into my home, their eagerness to reconnect was almost overwhelming. They asked about my life, my work, my dreams, questions that felt both genuine and rehearsed. I caught myself watching their faces closely, searching for cracks in their stories, for signs that this wasn't just about making amends. There was something they weren't telling me, something lurking beneath their apologies. One evening, as we sat around the kitchen table, my mother's voice dropped to a whisper. "There's more to why we left," she said, eyes darting away. "Things you don't know yet, things that might change how you see everything." My heart pounded. What could be so important that they kept it hidden all these years? The air thickened with unspoken secrets, and I realized this reunion was only the beginning of a much deeper story. Despite the doubts swirling in my mind, I made a choice. I told them they could stay, for now. I needed to see the truth for myself, to understand what had driven them away and why they had come back. It was a risk, opening my door and my heart again, but I was tired of living in the shadows of the past. Maybe, just maybe, this was the chance to rewrite our story. But as I watched them settle into my home, I couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle was just beginning. The fragile peace between us was a thin veil, and beneath it, the storm was gathering strength. Whatever secrets they held, I was determined to uncover them, no matter the cost. At first, I told myself to be patient. After all, people make mistakes, and maybe my parents were genuinely trying to make amends. But as the days passed, the cracks in their carefully constructed facade began to show. Small things that didn't add up, little inconsistencies that gnawed at my trust like termites in wood. It started with the way they avoided certain topics. When I asked about their lives during the years they were gone, their answers were vague, rehearsed, or quickly changed. My father would glance away, his voice faltering when I pressed for details. My mother's eyes would dart nervously, as if afraid I might uncover something she wanted to keep hidden. I wanted to believe their silence was just pain or shame, but a growing unease settled in my chest. One afternoon, I found myself flipping through some old photo albums they had brought with them. There were pictures of family gatherings I'd never heard about, vacations I wasn't invited to, moments frozen in time that felt like betrayals all over again. How could they have lived those lives without me? The sting of exclusion was sharp, and I felt the old wounds reopening. Flashbacks flooded my mind, nights spent crying alone in my room, the ache of watching other kids with their parents, the hollow feeling of being forgotten. I remembered the countless times I had begged myself to be strong, to survive without them, and now here they were, acting like strangers who had suddenly decided to step back into my life. Then came the lies, small at first forgotten appointments, unexplained absences, stories that didn't quite match up. But soon the deception grew bolder. I overheard a phone call where my father's voice was tense, discussing money in a way that didn't sit right with me. My heart sank as I realized this wasn't just about reconciliation. There was something else at play. One evening, while they were asleep, I found a letter tucked away in a drawer. The envelope was worn, the handwriting familiar but distant. My hands trembled as I unfolded it, and my breath caught in my throat. The letter revealed a financial arrangement, debts, property disputes, and a plan that involved using me to regain control of the family home and assets. The betrayal cut deeper than any absence ever had. I sat there, the letter trembling in my hands, feeling the fragile hope I'd clung to shatter into 1,000 pieces. How could they pretend to care when all along they were plotting behind my back? The trust I had tried to rebuild crumbled, replaced by a cold, bitter realization I was being used. That night, sleep eluded me. I replayed every conversation, every smile, every tear they had shed. Was it all an act? Had I been nothing more than a pawn in their game? The emotional weight was crushing, but beneath the pain, a fierce determination began to grow. I refused to be a victim again. The next morning, I confronted them. My voice was steady, but my heart pounded like a drum. "Why didn't you tell me the truth?" I demanded. "What are you really after?" Their faces paled, and for the first time, I saw fear flicker in their eyes. The fragile peace was gone, replaced by a storm that was about to break wide open. I needed answers. No more lies, no more secrets. It was time to face the truth, whatever it was, and finally take control of my story. The moment I demanded the truth, the air in the room shifted, thick with tension, heavy with years of silence and unspoken pain. My parents sat across from me, their faces pale, eyes flickering between guilt and defiance. For the first time since they returned, the carefully crafted mask slipped, revealing raw, vulnerable versions of themselves. What followed was nothing short of explosive. My mother's voice cracked as she began to speak, her words tumbling out in a rush. "We never wanted to leave you," she said, tears welling up, "but there were things you didn't know, things we couldn't tell you." My father nodded, his jaw clenched tight as if holding back a storm. "We were trapped in a situation we couldn't escape. It wasn't about you, it was about survival." I listened, torn between anger and a flicker of empathy. They spoke of betrayals I had never imagined, family debts, threats, and a toxic relationship with my grandfather that had forced them into silence and exile. They had been fighting battles I knew nothing about, sacrifices made in shadows, all while I was left to believe I was abandoned because I wasn't worth the fight. But the anger inside me burned hotter than ever. How could they expect me to forgive years of loneliness and pain with a few words? How could they ask me to understand when they had left me to face the world alone? The betrayal felt like a knife twisting deeper with every excuse. Then came the twist, something I never saw coming. My uncle, the one I had always trusted, stepped forward with a confession that shattered everything. I was the one who pushed them away, he admitted, voice heavy with regret. "I didn't want them to have anything to do with you. I thought I was protecting the family, but I was wrong." The room fell silent, the weight of his betrayal settling over us like a dark cloud. I was stunned. The person I had confided in, the one I thought had my back, had been working against me all along. The lines between friend and foe blurred, and the emotional turmoil inside me reached a breaking point. Anger, hurt, confusion. They all collided in a storm I struggled to contain. Yet amid the chaos, a strange clarity emerged. I realized that forgiveness wasn't about excusing the past. It was about freeing myself from its grip. But forgiveness didn't mean forgetting or surrendering. It meant choosing to protect my heart while opening the door to healing on my own terms. I looked at my parents, at the broken family before me, and made a decision. I would no longer be a passive player in their story. I would take control, set boundaries, and demand the respect I deserved. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was mine to walk. As I stood there, shattered but resolute, I knew this confrontation was just the beginning. The truth had been laid bare, and now it was time to rebuild. Not just my relationship with them, but my own sense of self. No matter what came next, I was ready to fight for my peace, my dignity, and my future. After the confrontation, I knew I couldn't go back to the way things were. The cracks in our family were too deep, the wounds too raw, but I also knew I couldn't let those cracks define me. It was time to rise from the ashes of my past and reclaim the power that had been stolen from me for so long. The first step was setting boundaries clear, firm lines that no one could cross. I told my parents that their apologies weren't enough, actions mattered now. I refused to be manipulated or used as a pawn in their schemes. It wasn't easy. There were moments when their pleas for forgiveness tugged at my heart, moments when I doubted myself and wondered if I was being too harsh. But every time I wavered, I reminded myself of the years I had spent alone, the nights I cried without them, the silence that had shaped my childhood. I also began to expose the truth not just to them, but to the wider family and community. I reached out to relatives who had been kept in the dark, sharing what I had uncovered about the financial motives and betrayals. Some were shocked, others defensive, but many offered their support. It was a relief to find allies in unexpected places, friends who stood by me, neighbors who listened, even distant cousins who had their own stories of pain and resilience. Still, the journey was far from smooth. There were setbacks that threatened to break me. One night, overwhelmed by the weight of it all, I broke down completely. Tears streamed down my face as I questioned whether I had the strength to keep fighting. But in that moment of despair, I found a flicker of hope, a reminder that vulnerability wasn't weakness, but a step toward healing. With each challenge, I grew stronger. I learned to trust my instincts, to speak my truth without fear, and to protect my heart fiercely. The support I received became a lifeline, a reminder that I wasn't alone in this battle. Together, we began to rewrite the narrative of my family, one honest conversation at a time. Just when I thought I was gaining ground, a final betrayal hit like a thunderclap. Someone I had trusted, someone I believed was on my side, turned against me, threatening to undo everything I had worked for. The shock was devastating, shaking the fragile foundation I had built, but instead of crumbling, I steeled myself. This was the moment that would define me. I realized that rising from the ashes wasn't about avoiding pain or betrayal. It was about facing them head on and refusing to be defeated. I was no longer the scared, abandoned child I once was. I was a woman who had fought through darkness and come out stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever came next. As I prepared for the ultimate showdown, I felt a fierce determination burning inside me. This was my story, my fight, and I was ready to claim the justice and peace I deserved. No matter the obstacles, I would stand tall and face the storm, because sometimes the greatest strength comes from the deepest scars. The day of reckoning arrived like a storm I couldn't escape. Months of gathering evidence, confronting lies, and building my case had led to this moment, the ultimate showdown. I stood before my parents and the family members who had enabled their deception, not in the quiet of my home, but in a public arena where the truth could no longer be hidden behind closed doors. My heart pounded fiercely, a mix of fear and fierce determination swirling inside me. I was terrified of what might happen if I failed, terrified of the humiliation that could come from exposing my family's darkest secrets. But beneath that fear was a courage I hadn't known I possessed, a fire ignited by years of pain and the refusal to be silenced any longer. As I spoke, laying bare the betrayals, the financial manipulations, and the emotional wounds, the room grew heavy with tension. Faces that once seemed so familiar twisted with shock, guilt, and anger. My parents' eyes darted nervously, their carefully rehearsed apologies now meaningless in the face of undeniable truth. The enablers, relatives who had stood by silently or actively worked against me, could no longer hide behind their silence. The emotional stakes were higher than ever. This wasn't just about money or property. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my voice, and my life. Every word I spoke was a step toward freedom, a declaration that I would no longer be a victim of their betrayal. The humiliation I had feared transformed into a powerful vindication as the truth illuminated the shadows where lies had thrived for so long. Throughout the confrontation, I caught glimpses of others in the room, friends, distant family, even strangers, who watched with tears in their eyes, inspired by my courage. I realized then that my fight was bigger than me. It was a beacon for anyone who had ever been abandoned, betrayed, or silenced. My story was their story, and my strength was theirs to claim. But the outcome still hung in the balance. Every moment felt like walking a tightrope between justice and defeat. Would the truth be enough to heal the wounds? Would those who had hurt me finally face the consequences? The tension was unbearable, but I refused to back down. When the final verdict came, it wasn't just a legal victory, it was a personal triumph. The truth was acknowledged, the betrayals exposed, and the path to healing finally opened. My parents and their enablers were held accountable, and I was free to begin rebuilding my life on my own terms. As the room emptied and the weight of the confrontation lifted, I felt a profound sense of relief and empowerment. The battle had been brutal, but I had emerged stronger, my voice louder and clearer than ever before. The ultimate showdown was over, but my journey toward healing was just beginning. With the truth finally out in the open, I was ready to move forward toward peace, toward forgiveness if I chose it, and toward a future where I was no longer defined by the past. The scars remained, but they were no longer chains. They were reminders of my strength, my resilience, and the power of standing up for myself when it mattered most. Looking back on everything, the years of silence, the pain of abandonment, the betrayals that cut so deep, I'm amazed at how far I've come. The journey wasn't easy. There were moments when I felt utterly broken, when the weight of it all threatened to crush me. But through the darkness, I found a light inside myself I never knew existed, a strength born from surviving, from refusing to be defined by the past. I've learned that healing isn't a straight path. It's messy, full of setbacks and breakthroughs, moments of despair followed by hope. But most importantly, it's a choice. A choice to reclaim your story, to stand up for yourself, and to refuse to let pain dictate your future. I chose that path, and it has changed everything. Justice wasn't just about holding others accountable. It was about freeing myself. It was about saying, I matter, my voice matters, and in that declaration, I found peace. Not the kind of peace that erases scars, but the kind that lets you carry them with grace, knowing they are proof of your resilience. I'm no longer isolated by my past. Instead, I'm connected to my own strength, to the people who have supported me, and to a community of women who understand what it means to fight for their dignity and their truth. If you're watching this and feeling lost or betrayed, know that you're not alone. Your story matters, and your voice deserves to be heard. So, I invite you to share your story in the comments. Let's support each other. Together, we can build a space where pain turns into healing, where isolation becomes connection, and where every woman finds the courage to reclaim her life. Because no matter what you've been through, it's never too late to rise, to heal, and to empower yourself. This is more than my story. It's ours, and together we are stronger than any past that tried to hold us back.